Okay, we're going to start with question for the audience first. So raise your hand if you agree with the following statements. First, being smart is good. Okay, interesting. I think the only people who didn't raise their hands were looking at their phones. 2, second, I think I am intelligent. This is a tricky one. Oh, lots of humble people out there. Okay. All right. Okay, so why do we spend so much time and effort trying to cultivate intelligence? So I want to hear a bit more about my two new friends here. I don't know you very well. So tell me a little bit about yourself. Justin, when did you realize that you were smart?
Well, I didn't raise my hand, so I'm still hoping one day to be told that. No, it feels like I have a very non-specialist's account of what smartness is, so I'm looking forward to it being refined tonight in conversation with Danny. It feels to me like I'm smart sometimes, and it's hard for me to know when. Sometimes it seems to me like I pivot between two self-conceptions, that I'm a god of the intellect and everybody who hears me speak is blessed beyond measure, and that I've been faking it this whole time, that every admissions committee that ever let me pass has gotten it wrong, that one day the president of the university is going to show up at my door and say, this has all been a mistake, take those degrees off your wall, give them back. It seems to me like those are the only two sort of speeds I have. So 51% of the time, maybe I feel intelligent.
Danny, when did intelligence become like a concept or a quality that you were aware of in the world?
I have no idea. I mean, it's one of those things that would have been younger than I can remember, because, but it all depends on what you mean by intelligence, and are we doing lay talks or other things? But it's one of those things where I think we very young start to develop an idea of intelligence and the ability to think. And even young children know that they can think. And so it must have been pretty young.
So at this point, how would you define intelligence?
So there are many different ways I could do that, but because I'm a psychologist, I'll just go to the psych literature and say that the standard model of intelligence involves something like the ability to adapt to novel situations and solve problems that are novel and arise in ways that you have not just learned the correct answer, but can actually be fluid in your response to it in a way that will help you thrive.
Justin, you one of your many research interests is in disability ethics, with a particular focus on intellectual disabilities. Your background, like your primary field, though, is in, like, we share a primary field in medieval studies, right?
Kind of.
Yeah. Okay,
yeah.
so can you tell a bit of the story of how you get from kind of, medieval philosophy and ethics into disability?
So I did a PhD on virtue ethics. Virtue ethics just is one way to try to think about the question, what makes a flourishing human life? What would it be for our lives to go well? How can we live lives excellently? And along the way, I started thinking about disability ethics, largely under the influence of my little sister, Jenna. She's 32 years old, and she has Down syndrome. What's interesting about this is I didn't know that Down syndrome sort of ethics and thinking was a school of thought. I met my sister before I ever met any theorists of Down syndrome. And so what just struck me was, well, number one, I had a competitive advantage. And number two, that nobody with Down syndrome has ever been, so far as I know, enrolled in any of the educational institutions I've been a part of. And I think that's really a fascinating, though perhaps kind of obvious fact. What it suggests is that many of the paradigms for inclusivity might not actually extend to certain, call them hard cases. I thought, well then, if we were to think about society as including these hard cases, what would need to be the case about the rest of our organization of society if we were going to include those kinds of people like my sister Jenna? Or if we were going to have an account of their dignity and standing as fellow citizens, regardless of their relative inability to score very high on, say, intelligence tests. So it was from thinking about ethics that I got into thinking about disability stuff. And now I'm thinking about the way that disability calls into question intuitions we have about meritocracy and about lives worth living as well. It's widely seen to be the case that people with Down syndrome stereotypically are like overly joyful, and they're extremely sort of personal. My sister is one case in point. And yet, as one scholar says, we tend not to be friends with people with profound intellectual disabilities. And so what is it like to have among our society people who are generally joyful and happy, but whom we don't really want to share our lives? And those are kind of the hard questions I think about in disability ethics.
Have you ever taken a class that you took the class because the title was funny? I don't know many classes that have funny titles, but here's one. Oh, yeah, okay. What was it called? The Course Awakens. Right, great. But it took a student. Okay, but here's a professor who has a class called Human Intelligence and Human Stupidity. What led you to teach the course Human Intelligence and Human Stupidity, and what does it mean?
So it's funny because humans are incredible. We're incredible, right? Like listening to me right now, what am I doing? I'm coming up with words. I'm coming up with grammar. I'm putting them together. I'm sending messages from my brain to my motor cortex, from my motor cortex to my lips and to my tongue and to my vocal cords to create sound waves. Those sound waves travel to hit your ear. They're just sound waves. You have to determine the difference between my voice and the ambient sounds, the person next to you coughing or shuffling, the reverb that we're hearing out of my microphone. Pull out what the meaning of those words are, pull out the grammar of that word, figure out how this conceptually fits with everything that's going on today. And while you're doing that, I'm giving you more words to hear. And you can do it effortlessly. You understand what I'm saying. That's incredible. It's impossible. And humans can do it. We're so smart. And yet, right? Everybody's laughing because they know what I'm going to say with and yet. Like we've got the Jersey Shore, right? I mean, there are so many mind-bogglingly stupid things that even the smartest people do. And so, when people think about human intelligence, like, well, you're either smart or you're dumb. And it's like, no, we're all smart, we're all dumb. And trying to understand this dichotomy is a real puzzle. I mean, humans are, by nature, a contradiction. And so I thought it was a great place to try to explore the human condition is by thinking about our intellectual capacity and the fact that while we can do so many amazing things, we can also do so many not so amazing things. So, and also, I thought it would be a funny title.
Yeah. Okay, so here we're kind of getting, honing in at this question of, what is intelligence? Because I can imagine a definition of intelligence then that would be the ability to do amazing things, or the ability to do good, to do excellently. And then when you do something bad, when you do something stupid, you're just turning it off. I mean, because people who have that capacity are always doing stupid things, right? They're making bad choices, but that's a different thing, right? So what's the difference between making bad choices and not having intelligence? Maybe Justin.
I want to hear Danny talk about the distinction between intelligence and wisdom.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, so I know there are students in my class out there, and it's going to be a spoiler alert for them. But I would say that the opposite of stupidity isn't intelligence. The opposite of stupidity is wisdom. Mm-hmm. There's a difference between having the computational capacity to engage in very intelligent behaviors and the wisdom to know when to do that. And so, there certainly are times when, so humans are imperfect creatures, right? So we have intelligence and the ability to solve incredibly difficult problems. But we have limits to our memory, we have limits to our attention, we get distracted, there's a lot of things going on there. And that's just the nature of the fact that the world gives us imperfect information, we're doing the best we can, and what we do with what we have is usually pretty good. But we don't usually compare ourselves to pretty good, we compare ourselves to perfect. And when we compare ourselves to perfect, we fail, because we're not perfect. And so, there are some times where our failures are greater than just not perfect. But it's nonetheless a very human thing to be able to both, send the Mars rover to the moon. Not to the moon. That would be a mistake. That would be stupidity. To send the Mars rover to Mars. Like, we managed to send a rover to Mars. I mean, how incredible is that? And at the same time, when we sent it there, but then some of the engineers were using centimeters and some of them were using inches, and so it ended up crashing. And it's like, we sent something to Mars and we crashed it because we couldn't keep our units consistent? How the heck, right? Anyway.
So why couldn't we just, why couldn't we just have enough parameters to achieve the wise choice? Like, why can't you just keep adding parameters so that you get the wise outcome every time?
Well, we don't have the cognitive capacity for that as humans. I mean, we could do it with AI potentially, but if you look at AI, they've now got, millions of parameters in some of these AI systems, and it's not that hard to trick AI into saying something pretty darn stupid.
Yeah, but in 10 years, we're going to have as many parameters as we want. Is the difference between wisdom and intelligence then just a matter of compute?
I don't think so. Being wise is perhaps about strategies that you take towards being effective in a way that is different from the computational ability to do it. And so a lot of times we talk about, do people like to think? Do they have the capability of thinking? Do they have the capability is like, do they have the skill set that they need? Have they learned calculus? Have they learned whatever they need to read? But then there's also do they have the bandwidth right now when somebody's throwing something at their head, or when there's loud music going on, or whatever it is that's going on. So there are many things that influence our ability to think, and the ability to think can be, wisdom and intelligence, therefore, could be very different things. So I could be able to think and decide not to do it. That seems like I am intelligent because I have the ability to think, but not the wisdom to engage in the thinking. Mm-hmm. And so those are fundamentally different questions.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Justin, can a non-intelligent person be wise?
I hope so.
Can a cognitively challenged person be wise?
Yeah, I think so. So I think about wisdom as a virtue. So since antiquity, people have thought about these 4 virtues, and the intuition behind the thinking of the virtues is that your life is a kind of journey, right? And you have certain goals and ends. You want it to be excellent. You want it to be lived well. And there are these obstacles in your way. There are these difficulties to making your life a success. What are they? Well, there are all these pleasures out there in the world, and they might distract you. And so you need the virtue of temperance to deal with these pleasures. There are all these pains. Doing things that are good is difficult sometimes. You need courage to deal with the pains. There are all these other people out there in the world, and you have to relate to them rightly. There's a virtue called justice for that. But then there's a virtue which is an intellectual virtue, and it's a kind of good habit of the mind that helps you identify what are the morally significant features of a situation and sort of distinguish those features from the morally irrelevant features of a situation, so that you might know what the right thing to do in a certain situation is, and then you might undergo the process of actually doing it. So the virtue of wisdom has a kind of priority over these other virtues, going back to Aristotle and Cicero and all the rest, because you need to know what to do in order to actually be able to do it. But I'm fascinated by this one paper which is trying to determine whether people with Down syndrome can exercise the virtues. And they set up a puppet show. And they have children with Down syndrome, with autism, and then normally developing children. And in the puppet show, one of the puppets is bullying another. And they ask the three groups of people, how do you respond? What does the child feel? And the normally developing children can say, the child feels sad, I want to help them. The children with autism can't say either of those things. And the children with Down syndrome can't have, it seems, a theory of mind about this puppet. But then when you ask, so they ask them how do they feel, they can't answer the question. But if you ask them, then what would you do? They say things like, I would go and give them a hug. And so it's interesting to me that it seems like in this case, they sort of jump a step. They are able to say what they would do without having the theory of mind of this bullied puppet in the middle. And this is, I think, the only paper in existence about whether children with Down syndrome have the kind of intellectual capacity to develop virtues. And what it suggests is they might actually be able to discern the right course of action, skipping an intermediary step that we tend to think of as an important step. So I don't really know what to do with that, but it does suggest that there's something going on here that might allow a person with cognitive impairments actually to exercise certain virtues like wisdom.
Okay, shifting gears. Here we are in the university. Everybody here, I imagine, has been working very hard today, and either you have actually been working very hard and you feel like you haven't been working hard enough, or maybe you actually haven't been working hard enough, but you still feel rightly like you haven't been working hard enough. You are inside a meritocracy, which means that you are justly being rewarded for how hard you work and how smart you are. And it is completely without regard to your other status. The society is blindly rewarding you justly for your work. That is the promise. So the question is that possible? Like, is this kind of objective, meritocratic reward for intelligence and hard work possible? And if so, what does that say about the pressures that we feel in the university?
Well, I guess I would say that there's noise in any system. And so the question shouldn't be, does every student get perfectly linearly ranked by their intelligence and their hard work in terms of how well they're doing? That's not going to be the case. Of course not. We have noise in the system. The question is, does working harder on average improve your outcomes? Does being smarter on average improve your outcomes? And the answer to both of those, I think, is true. Now, there are other things that also improve your outcomes. Having a lot of wealth can help you because you can buy things that you need to make things easier. Having good social connections can help you because you'll have friends to help you along the way. And I would say that although there are people who would describe college the way that you just, tongue-in-cheek did, I think many people would say, no, college is a place where you learn and you work hard, but you also develop friendships and you also develop social skills and soft skills and caring about society and integrate into society and learn how to be independent and all of these other things, which are all related to success, but are not perfectly related to success. And that's just because the world isn't perfect and the world has error and noise, and there's not much we can do about that. To the second half of your question, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? I think we can, and often do, distinguish sort of moral worth from utilitarian worth, in the sense that there are people who are able to, through their intelligence and their work ethic, produce more and do more good for the rest of the world, and then other people. And that is something we should value, because a person who cures cancer can do a lot of good for a lot of people. It's not the only thing we should value, and we can say just because this person is doing a lot of economic or utilitarian good doesn't mean that that person has more moral worth than a person who is able to accomplish less. Moral worth is determined by entirely different criteria. And so I think that this notion that, the notion that meritocracy is such that we should look at people who are the smartest and the hardest working and say, well, they are the best of us. That is not, I think, the way that most people actually do view the world, except in the context of who should I hire. Whereas in a context of like, who will do the most for my company, maybe you choose the person who has the most work ethic or intelligence or skills or whatever. In terms of who is going to be a valuable member of society, it's not like that, or it shouldn't be.
So meritocracy is this interesting word that begins as a slur and is now thought to be a desirable condition of affairs. So the word is invented by Michael Young in 1958 in a book called The Rise of the Meritocracy. And it's a kind of dystopian book. Why dystopian? Well, the myth that meritocracy tells about itself is that it replaces something like an aristocracy. Right? The idea here is that we apportion the goods and the status in our society as all societies do. And the question is, what's the principle we use for these things? Aristocracies tend to use something like hereditary inheritance. You're a prince because your father was a king, not because you earned it. So you might be in a more privileged position than anybody else, but no one in the society thinks that you earned it, right? And because you didn't earn it, that tends to come with a kind of moral obligation. Call it noblesse oblige, right? You're obligated to the lower classes precisely because you could have been them. It was a coin toss whether you were born in this family or in that. Meritocracy claims to be more just because it overthrows the unfairness of arbitrary distribution of the goods of a society. It says you are where you are according to your rank and dignity because you earned it. But then that comes with the nefarious downside that people who are on the lowest end of the meritocracy are also there because they earned it. So now the people at the top don't feel themselves in the same way to have the kind of obligation toward the rest of the people in the society. And the people on the lowest side of the society now have indignity attached to their poverty or low standing or whatever. So this is what Michael Young is worried about with meritocracy. And he predicts a future in which the people at the bottom look to populist leaders to overthrow the establishment. This is in 1958 he's writing. Populist leaders to overthrow the establishment because the establishment is only working for its own self. And if there's some plausibility or prophetic potential in that book, we might think, well, what is it about meritocracy which Young saw correctly, that it's a kind of dystopia rather than a paradise?
So if you don't mind if I jump in, this is a dangerous thing for me to say with medieval history scholars around, and I am not one of those. But when I think of aristocracy, there's the whole divine right of kings.
Yeah.
There's this notion that aristocrats didn't think that it was just luck. They thought that they were assigned their positions by gods, and that therefore the people at the bottom, in a way, if we believe that the deities have a monopoly on moral understanding, or at least a higher moral understanding, then to put those people into positions of power is because that is the right way it should be. And so, if anything, I would think, and then of course the same consequence that you just described, that the people at the bottom are there because the gods decreed that that is the right thing for them to be. And to me, that seems much more dystopian. So when you think about, there is a way that we have to, as a society, there is an allocation of resources. It has to happen. If there were unlimited resources, that would be wonderful, but there aren't. And so when we think about what are the possible methods of distribution of resources, Young, who I've never heard of before, but he may think that meritocracy is inferior to other systems like aristocracy, and that seems completely backwards to me.
Yeah, so he does not think that we should return to aristocracy. I think the argument is something like meritocracy is not as unblemished a system as you might hope. And this, I think, is a fruitful insight, because many of the people who want to reform institutions like universities want to reform them in the direction of being more meritocratic. So there are lots of critiques you could make here. One is that these universities are not, in fact, meritocratic at all. You have more people in the Ivy League from the top 1% of the income distribution than from the bottom 40 or 50%, right? So it matches the kind of inequalities more broadly about our society. So you could say, well, clearly this is not a meritocracy. This looks more like a hereditary aristocracy than anything else. What we need is to make it more meritocratic, and then you can think about different policies to do that. What I think Michael Young wants us to see is that there should be a kind of rupture between having enough, even a baseline amount of goods, and also social standing and dignity in a society. That should be detached from the feverishness with which we often need to grasp and claw for those things in a meritocracy. So I gave you the kind of argument for why meritocracy is bad for the people at the bottom. Daniel Markovits at Yale makes a similar argument for why meritocracy is bad for the people at the top. And the sort of catchphrase he uses is that the people who lose the meritocracy don't have enough work, and the people who win have too much work, right? So you all, by virtue of being in this room, are probably closer to the winners than the losers of the meritocracy. And my suspicion is that you don't feel like you can sort of rest on your laurels right now. You probably feel deeply precarious. You may have had a great amount of joy when you got into this institution, and then that faded very quickly as the exams came. And now you've got to maintain your position, right? You've got an internship to make it worth it. You've got to show that it wasn't a fluke all along. And so you have to continue jumping through these hoops, but the hoops get higher and smaller every time. And so you, the winners of the meritocracy, also feel a certain kind of oppression by virtue of having always to compete in the system. And so one argument is that it doesn't work for its winners, one argument is that it doesn't work for its losers. And I find these arguments pretty persuasive. Even when I wouldn't want to go back to aristocracy, the question then becomes, is there some third option?
Well, there's probably many more than two options out there, but I think there can be a distinction drawn between meritocracy and the things you're doing. So one issue is meritocracy, and the other is sort of like a winner-take-all society. And these can be distinguished. If you look at some of the winner-take-all society literature, they talk about historically, if you worked and you built a widget, you could sell your widget for some amount of dollars. And if you worked harder and built 2 widgets, you could set twice as much money. And 3 widgets is 3 times as much money and such. So there was a relationship between the amount you produced and the amount of money you could have, and it was something sort of linear. But today,
What's an example of a winner-take-all society?
An example of a winner-takes-all society, which is different. So what I was going to say is, if you make 4 widgets, I make 2, you make twice as much money as I. That's not a winner-take-all society. That's a standard economy. But if we're playing poker and you're 5% better than me, you end up with all the chips. And there's been arguments that have been made recently that society is changing towards winner-take-all. And the argument can be summed up in, imagine that back in the day before there was recording and radio, every town needed a singer. And if you wanted to hear music, you would have to go to the local musician. And so if the local musician in one town was 5% better than another local musician, then they made 5% more money perhaps because people would pay a little more. But for the most part, that wasn't the case. Now you've got someone like Taylor Swift, everyone in the world can listen to her. And if everyone in the world, if she's 5% better than the next person, everyone in the world will listen to her and not to the next best person. I know you may not think she's the best person, but she is probably the richest of the current ones. And so instead of needing every town to have their own musicians, every town to have its own, as big as a venue can fit, now you can have one person who controls the entirety of the wealth. And it's not just one person, it may be 10 or 100 or 1,000, but it's certainly not what it was before. And so this isn't about meritocracy per se. There is a meritocratic element to it because the person who's at the top is earning. But you can have meritocratic systems where the person at the top is only earning a little bit more than the people who are at the bottom. The change to this winner-take-all is what perhaps makes things more dangerous, because now if you can only have one person or a small percentage of people gaining all the wealth, then how you decide who those people are is a problem. But what you were suggesting earlier was less of a, we should decide a different way to give the very, very, very few people who have the wealth. Yeah. It's not about that. That's about how we decide who gets the wealth. You were arguing, I think, that the problem is that if you're not one of those very few people, it's really bad. And so maybe the right move is to try to figure out ways that we are less winner take all.
Yeah.
So part of this outline that I'm working with was written by students, so like really smart, thoughtful students, and it seems to me that intelligence is standing in here for what we might also call talent, which is like intelligence plus ability plus hard work, something like that. And so if we just kind of like take those three things together, right? Like what makes for a really successful student slash career, whatever. I think this is a really good practical question if we shift now towards kind of decision making and practical takeaways. Many students feel unintelligent or less talented. Many students feel like imposters at some point in their education. So how can we overcome this sense of lack? Can intelligence be increased? Can talent be increased? Can capacity and ability be increased? And if it can, is this something we should be striving for? Is there like a bigger picture in which we should be thinking about improving our talent?
Well, I got good news and I got bad news. The good news is that talent can be increased, that there are ways to improve both intellectual horsepower and hard work can be something that you can motivate, etc. I teach a class, Human Intelligence, Human Stupidity, which teaches people how to become smarter. So if you're not in my class, you should be. But assuming you value intelligence, which I guess is sort of the point of today, is whether you should. But whatever, you should be. So all of those things are, it is possible to become more talented in almost any domain. The bad news is that becoming more talented will not make you feel any less like an imposter. Because the reasons that make you feel like an imposter aren't because you're not talented. I mean, the students here are from Pitt and CMU, you're all talented. That's how you got in. The fact that you feel like an imposter is a divorce between reality of your talent and your perception of your talent. And that comes down to, well, I don't know if you want me to talk about this, I don't want to go too long, but one of the reasons for this is that we see what other people can do, and we assume they can do anything I know. Obviously, everyone knows, because I know it, so it's very obvious. But if they know something I don't, well, wow, look how smart they are. They know all the things I know and all the things they know. In reality, they don't know what you're knowing, and they're looking at you and saying, my God, that person is smart. And you're looking at them and saying, my God, that person is smart. And guess what? You're both right. But you're not able to understand the reality that you all specialize in different things. So when you look at what everyone else can do and you say, this person's brilliant at math, this person's brilliant at writing, this person's brilliant at football, this person's brilliant at singing, and I'm not brilliant in any of those things, but you're forgetting that your talent lies in medieval history or psychology or whatever it is, and they couldn't match you there. So I guess the point is that you're going to always be comparing yourself against everybody. There are always going to be people who are better at something than you because you can't be the best at everything, and then you're going to always feel a lack.
That is so true. I didn't realize this until like late in graduate school. Yeah.
So there's a book called Raising Henry by Rachel Adams at Columbia. Like many Ivy League professors, she's a meritocrat. She values intelligence very highly. And then she has this son named Henry, and Henry has Down syndrome. And it's a memoir of raising her son with Down syndrome. And there's this moment when her mother-in-law, Ellen, moves in to help take care of this baby. Her husband, John, comes from a very religious family, and she herself is not religious. Ellen is very, very religious, and this is always a sort of controversy between the two of them. Ellen is a Christian, and then there's this moment in the book where she talks about watching Ellen coo her baby to sleep. And she says she held him while he slept, making it clear that she had the same kind of love for him that she had for the rest of her grandchildren. I, speaking as the author, I had always thought and been worried about the disconnect in John's family, this very religious family, between accomplishment in academics and the love they gave for each other. These seem to be completely distinguished from each other. And now I saw that even if my son would never get a PhD or have advancement in his field, Llewellyn would love him all the same. And it seems to me that what's beautiful about that paragraph is this separation between sort of lovability or loveliness and intelligence and accomplishment. And I wonder if the feeling of imposter syndrome isn't something like a feeling of unlovability because deficient intellect. There's a sort of, one of the things that can arise from having a non-technical account of intelligence or smartness is that it becomes a kind of universal value symbol. And that if you have it, you are valuable, and if you don't, you're not. Now, I don't think this is a good argument, but it seems like those two are very closely squished together in many people's imaginations. Such that imposter syndrome comes about when I think, because I know my lovability is attached to my intellect, if I don't have the intellect, I might not have lovability, worthiness, whatever. And so one way to detach these kind of things is to calibrate your sense of your own intellect based upon what is real. Another is just to distinguish these two altogether. And I think what I love about studying disability is here is a case study of people, tons of people, who care for people who don't themselves have the ability to accomplish intellectually at a high level, reliably, all the time. And it's a sort of beautiful articulation of the distinguishability between loveliness, lovability, worthiness of love, and smartness, intellect, accomplishment, and all the rest. So what I say here is that I want to have a society in which we have dignity beyond accomplishment, where we live up to the things that we actually say are true, that a person's standing should not be conditional in our society, but that we should sort of receive our fellow citizens as gifts to be cherished rather than, entrants to be examined. But one thing I thought you said very beautifully and interestingly, I've been thinking about it for weeks since you said it. We had a planning call earlier on, and some of the students articulated their sort of desire behind this event, and they talked about a feeling of the phrase was, their intelligence always being evaluated by professors. And you stopped the student and said, when I give grades, I don't think I'm evaluating their intelligence, I think I'm evaluating their mastery in one very specific domain. And I've been thinking about that. I wonder if you could say a little bit about that publicly here, and then say something about why you think that disconnect is so ubiquitous, that students do in fact feel like they're not being evaluated in this narrow realm of mastery. Their intellect is being evaluated. Maybe their person is being evaluated. You don't think that's the case, but why do they think that's the case?
It's interesting you ask me why they think that's the case, because I don't think that's the case, and so it's hard. I'm trying to now project myself into the minds of my students. And I am actually surprised that my students would feel that way. When I teach, I have very, 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 very smart students who perform badly on certain exams because they didn't study, because they didn't come to class, because they didn't take it seriously for who knows why. Maybe they were just sick the day of the exam. I have students who have not necessarily performed well in other classes, who really take a love to psychology and put their all into it and do really well. I have students who perform very badly on the midterm and then turn it around. They meet with me and we figure out ways to improve, and they ace the final. I had a student who improved by over 45% last year between the midterm and the final, came out of the midterm almost failing the class and came out of the final with an A. And I can tell the difference between a person's score on a particular exam and their overall cognitive ability, let alone their worth as a person. When you take intro psych with me, I'm evaluating how well you can do psych. And how well you can do psych is not about your intelligence. It's about what you've put into the class. I mean, look, if you have more intellectual horsepower, it is easier for you to accomplish a high score in the class, because that's sort of what higher intelligence means, is that you are faster to learn it and faster to figure out the strategies. But that's not the same thing at all. And So actually, I found it puzzling during that talk when the student said, I feel like my professors are evaluating my intelligence, because that's not at all what I was doing when I graded students.
Could we poll the room?
Ooh.
So, okay,
Can't
here's
really
the
see
question.
anybody.
When you receive a grade, do you think this is a sign of your A, narrow mastery, or B, intelligence? Who says A, narrow mastery? And who says B, intelligence? Okay, so maybe it's 2/3 A, 1/3 B.
Of course, we did just tell them that.
We did tell you, yeah,
We just
so-
give them the answer.
yeah.
So what's with the people
We
who
did the
can't figure out the answer if we just told you? No, just kidding.
We did the intervention, then the test. We should have done the test before the intervention, yeah. Yeah.
All right, this, I think, is a great, well, okay. We have a tiny bit of time for me to ask my question,
Go.
which is about generative artificial intelligence. And I think the question I want to ask is just how do you, what is it that the human adds when they are applying for a job and they are inevitably up against other applicants, all of whom know how to use ChatGPT really well? Mm-hmm. What is it that the human is adding with their intelligence? Like, you all know how to use ChatGPT really well, whatever it is for your career. And it's not about ChatGPT anymore. It's about, like, what you add. What is it that you add when it comes to intelligence?
Well, I would say, first of all, that not everybody knows how to use AI very well. And for those of you in the room who do not, I would highly encourage you to figure out how to do that. So it's interesting because you say, what is the human add? And I want to turn that question on its head a little bit. The question to me is what GPT adds to the human. GPT is a tool. It's like having a hammer. A person who is trying to build a house and has to do it without a hammer is going to not be as successful as a person who has that hammer. And to ask the question, well, what does the human add to the hammer? Well, the human is the one who adds the direction, the guidance, the figures out what is the goal. It does all of the work of setting the agenda and identifying what is the strategy that they want to do, they want to move forward with. A hammer on its own is just sitting there on the ground. And the same is true of GPT. GPT without a human to guide it is just a prompt, like a little cursor, blinking, saying, ask me what you want to ask me. It doesn't have the ability to set an agenda or figure out what the right approaches are, to figure out the nuance of the situation and apply it to that, the complexity. And so the question of what does the human add to the AI feels backwards to me.
But it does have the ability to pretend to do that, right? Like it could produce your whole job application.
Yeah, absolutely. It could produce a job application. But here's the question. If you were to just say, hey, write a job application for me. If I were to say to GPT, write a job application for me, it would, but it wouldn't know what type of job I want. And it wouldn't know what my specific skills and abilities are that I am bringing to that job. It wouldn't be able to frame me or position me appropriately for that job. It wouldn't know what are the skills that I enjoy engaging in, and so a job that fits my skills and not. The way that it could know that is I could tell it, but then that's what I'm adding to the system, right? Is that I have to guide the GPT, the GPT output. If I just tell it, write a job application for me, it'll come up with a generic application that won't necessarily match me to the jobs that I want to be in. Mm-hmm. Then I could ask it, what sorts of jobs would I want to be in? And it can be suggestions, but it's not me. It can't know that perfectly. It requires my guidance and judgment above and beyond that. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, I think GPT is a wonderful tool. It enhances the abilities of humans dramatically. But that's the trick. It's GPT enhancing human abilities. It's not humans adding to to what GPT can do.
Okay.
So I want to say two things. That the AI is not going to give you ends, and it's not going to give you love. That's right. So the first thing, it can't give you ends. It seems to me. Now, first of all, big disclaimer here. I don't think I, or maybe anyone in the world, knows what they're talking about when they talk about AI. So just like my confidence interval is in the basement right now, and any comments I'm going to make here, okay? You all see the Meta AI rollout a couple of days ago, where Mark Zuckerberg was asking it to make like a barbecue sauce, and it couldn't do it. This man invested. The AI invested right now. Do you guys know this? That in the first half of 2025, capital expenditures in AI data centers outstripped all of US consumer spending. The reason we're not in a total recession right now is only because of capital expenditures in AI right now. So I don't know if I'm talking about like autocorrect or if I'm talking about the singularity. And there is literally tens of billions of dollars of like venture capital propaganda ensuring I don't know what I'm talking about when I talk about these things. Okay, so confidence level on this is in the basement. It seems to me that what these tools still can't give us is the question of what is worth putting all of this computative energy towards. So what are the ends at which this enormous skill, such as it is, in means is worth aiming at? I can tell it to make a barbecue recipe, I can tell it to make a job application, but it can't distinguish which of those two. It can't give me, I think, the kinds of interventions that would make a society better and richer, better and juster and more moral and all the rest. I don't think it can give you ends. I think one reason that, we'll stop there. And I don't think I can give you loves. So the biggest worry I have about AI is that it's going to fall into the nexus of inequality that everything else in our society is racked by. So the people who are using it for romantic partners, these are people who are already on the bottom, like the losers in the society, right? People who are using it for therapists are people who can't afford therapy as it is. So already what's going to happen is we're going to have a society in which reality is going to become a luxury good. And for the poor, we're going to give them AI companions in every regard. It seems to me. And then what happens is it becomes then a surrogate for real human interaction. AI can't give you love, right? So then one kind of dilemma I think some people encounter when thinking about Turing machines and others is that we have assumed that intellect, reason, is something like the thing that makes human beings distinct from all the rest of the world. And now it turns out that there is this other thing that seems to be able to have the same power that we have, and now it seems like we're not special anymore. There's lots to say about the desire for us to be special as it is, but it seems to me to say that if actually human beings are constituted by their loves. This is a line from Augustine, this like early Christian philosopher, right? My love is my weight, it carries me wherever I go. If my loves and the order of my loves is like closer to the significance of my being and personhood, humanity as such, then that seems to be the sort of thing that AI is not going to be able to infringe upon. So it can't give you ends and it can't give you loves, I think.
All right. We've got lots of questions to get to. So I'm going to start with one from the iPad, and then we've got people who are going to be going around and with microphones to take questions from the audience. So if you have a question in the audience, raise your hand, and someone will find you. In fact, it'd be great if the people with microphones can just find people, because I can barely see anybody with the bright lights here. So, okay. But, so here is just a great basic question. Does AI have intelligence but lacks wisdom?
So one of the challenges with asking a question like AI generally is that there are many, many types of AI.
Sure.
And so my mind naturally goes to like LLMs, but there's all sorts of expert systems.
Let's say an LLM, that's what I'm familiar with. Mm-hmm. That's what maybe most of us are most familiar with. Yeah,
so I'm gonna just reject your answer to what I just asked you.
Okay. Okay.
And I want, because I think there's a better example, which is, and students who have taken my class, who are in my class right now, will have known this is on my mind because we just talked about it this week. But I'd like to talk about like chess bots or Go bots. So these are things that people have said, well, for many years they said chess will never be something that an AI can beat humans at, and now, of course, no humans can beat the best AI. For a while they said Go is a game that no AI could win at, and now, of course, the very best humans could lose easily to AI. What's interesting about that is going back to how I originally defined intelligence, which is that I said it's about flexibility and the ability to adapt. Because one of the interesting things about the best chess bots is if I were to say to them, actually, in the past, knights moved as knights, but we're going to shift it, so it's a chess game again, but now knights move as bishops. Human experts in chess would be flabbergasted. That would be hard. It would make them worse at chess, there's no question. But they would still be able to play chess, and after a couple of hundred games, they would probably be very, very good at chess with this new variant. The AI that does this would have to be retrained almost from scratch. It wouldn't be able to adapt to these sorts of things. And so one of the things about artificial intelligence is that it isn't as adaptive as we would like it to be. And that is a place that humans can learn from 2, 3, 5 instances how to do something. AI takes hundreds of thousands or millions of instances to learn how to do these things at the same level. And so I don't know how that relates to wisdom versus intelligence, but at least at this level of AI, I would put forth that humans are still smarter than AI.
Great. Justin, how do you think the college admissions process should treat intelligence and wisdom?
So something that we haven't had the opportunity to talk about here is the ways that something like intelligence and wisdom show up in ways that are not obviously socially recognized. So sort of concrete examples here, right? I have 2 little kids. My wife and her mother and my mother know exactly what to do with them in almost every circumstance. And I just follow their lead. And anything that I know, I learn from them, right? And I try very desperately to know. Those aren't very easily monetizable skills in our society. There's clearly something like intelligence and wisdom going on here in the way to take care of and nurture a small baby. I wonder what it would look like if college admissions committees pluralized the different varieties that intelligence takes in the real world. If you did bad on the SAT, but you were really good at welding, should the university let you in? I think it'd be a fascinating experiment, right?
So
Question.
Sorry, can I just add to that? I would say that sort of universities already do, right? So universities admit on athletic performance, they admit on musical performance, they admit on entrepreneurial experience, they admit on a lot of different things. And I think it's interesting because we put the university as though there's one university. There are many different universities in the country, and there are religious institutions, and there are large publics, and there are Research One universities, and there are local community colleges. And the diversity of the university system is one of, I think, its greatest strengths in America. And so I don't think we need every university to use the same standards for admission. And when I say standards there, I mean the same things. You could have universities that care a great deal about faith, for example, and how one interacts with their faith, and you can have another that cares really mostly about how people interact with music. And we do have that, actually. I think it's really interesting if we had universities that really cared about caretaking. We could have universities that specialize in that, and for people who really wanted that, they could go there, and then those universities should develop measures of taking in people who that's what they are good at and that's what they care about. And I think actually one of the things, the homogenization of universities, making them all about the exact same thing, who is performing the best on the SATs, that's a recent thing, and I think it's a real shame for university system and America, because not everyone thinks the same way, and it would be better if universities had ways of training people who thought differently, and then they would theoretically want to admit people who thought differently, that they could maximize the advantage of those places, of different people and different skills.
And in their defense, I mean, caretaking would then need to be one of the metrics in U.S. News and World Report, right? It would need to show up in the metrics if it was actually going to be like held with the prominence that I think it should, right?
I mean, I would love to see that. I would love to see some schools that are ranked. I mean, so right now you have a party schools. U.S. News does rank how good people are at partying, because you do have the party schools.
Penn State wins all the time, as far as I can tell. Yeah.
You would think that you would have a school that would, like, if U.S. News and World Report put out something of, this is the school where the people care the most. This is the school where the people have the best social relationships and deepest friendships. I mean, I don't know if anyone in this room or elsewhere would say, yeah, that's the school I want to go to, is the one where that is prioritized. There must be people who would, and wouldn't that be interesting? Maybe we should, monetize this.
Okay, we've got one down here, and then another one in the back. Okay, we've got we're going to go to the audience now, starting right here, and then to the back, and then back down here, and then over here.
So I guess my question is sort of two parts. You can choose not to answer the second part if you don't want to. But where does creativity fall on the intelligence, talent, wisdom scale? And does AI have creativity?
I guess I have to answer this one. There are different models of that in psychology, so I'm just going to jump back into the literature instead of having to say myself. Robert Sternberg, who is one of the major players in intelligence, it says there are three types of intelligence: practical intelligence, which you might call wisdom; analytical intelligence, which is what most people think of when they think of intelligence; and the third is creative intelligence. And so he separates them from those others. Another major model, the General G model, says that the people who are the best at analytics are also the best at creativity. And there is good evidence to show that the people who are the best at verbal skills and mathematical skills and spatial skills also do well on tests of creativity. And so maybe it's uniform. Who knows? Gardner, who has the multiple intelligence models, doesn't even talk about creativity. And so, in terms of does AI exhibit creativity? So I've sort of hinted at this, and this is a little outside of the beaten path of how most people think about things, so this is certainly idiosyncratic, what I'm about to say. I like to think about the extended organism, that humans as thinkers are not just encapsulated within themselves, but they are part of the tools that they use, right? I mean, I think with a calculator, and I am a better thinker because I have a calculator. If I write things down, I remember things better. And when I use AI, I think better as well. I don't think AI, LLMs anyway, think at all in the absence of a human guiding them. The way that an LLM works is you ask it a question, it responds. And so an LLM without a human is not creative. It does nothing. It just sits there. An LLM with a human is now part of a symbiote, and that symbiote can be extremely creative. And the question is, how much of that creativity comes from the LLM and how much comes from the human? And I'm not sure that's an answerable question, because once you become a symbiote, you become a single organism. Maybe we could call it a cyborg, as I say, shouting out to some people in the class that I've talked to about this sort of thing. So I almost think that the question of which is more creative, a human or an AI, is like asking which is better of a lichen, the fungus or the plant. They're almost one creature at that point. And so humans can be differentiated from LLMs, but I'm not sure LLMs can work at all without a human.
Going all the way to the back.
First of all, when you began and mentioned stupidity, I immediately thought of the exemplar of nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are suicidal. They're robbing the world of needed resources, affecting and have become ubiquitous. To me, nuclear weapons are the major example of our common stupidity. My question has to do with a book I read many years ago, Barbara Tuchman's book, The March of Folly, in which intelligent people like Robert McNamara, in her example about the war in Vietnam, people of intelligence got the information from within their own sources, but her metaphor was wooden-headedness, that the war in Vietnam, or the U.S. or the British in relation to American colonies, kept getting the messages, the intelligence, but it did not penetrate into action to change. From what I remember of her book, she had no real quote-unquote solution. I don't know if you have any further thoughts about this pattern of wooden-headedness that seems so common in the human experience.
Another denotation of intelligence.
Human stupidity. Huh?
Oh, this is Throw this one at me again, huh? Why do I get all the hard questions? Yeah, I mean, I would say wood-headedness falls under wisdom more than intelligence. It's knowing. So if you think about what are the sort of elements of wisdom, one of them is knowing when you don't know, and knowing to be humble about what you do know. And that is something that not everyone is very good at. And there's an old paper in psychology, the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's called Unskilled and Unaware, which is the people who are the least capable of doing certain things are often also the ones who are the least aware of the fact that they are not doing things well. I'm not familiar with the specific book that you are speaking of, but I think it is definitely the case that there are a zillion biases that psychologists have identified that affect both individuals and groups of humans that prevent us from being able to, confirmation bias being one of them, groupthink being another, that prevent us from being able to flexibly adapt to new information, which, by the way, is what I defined intelligence to be. So, this is, when I talk about human intelligence, human stupidity, I don't deny the stupidity half of that. And that's part of the class. That's part of the human condition. We are not perfect creatures. And I don't think that is going to satisfy you as an answer because it doesn't provide any solutions. But I'm not sure there are any solutions that are simple and can be conveyed or thought through in the context of this forum. So I'm afraid I can't be more satisfying.
So let me throw one comment in here about political philosophy and then about angels. So Michael Sandel, in his book on meritocracy, observes in all of presidential speeches how often the word smart shows up. Shows up almost never in American history. And then with Clinton, it's like 50 times, Obama like 100 times, Bush 100 times, Obama 400 times. There's more mention of the word smart in Obama's speeches than in all of presidential rhetoric until that point, right? He's not against all wars, he's against dumb wars. He's in favor of smart tax policy, et cetera, et cetera. Smart becomes here a proxy for good, right? And Sandel's suggestion is maybe this gradual accumulation of smartness getting us into all these foreign adventures produces something like a populist backlash to them, right? If the smart people got us into this circumstance, to hell with smarts. So let's be aggressively ignorant, right? As a matter of principle, in opposition to the people who have gotten us into this, this mess with their PhDs from Yale. And then about angels. So the word intelligences in like pre-modern thought doesn't refer to like a certain quantifiable feature of the intellect. It refers to angels and demons. Now, you don't have to believe in angels and demons. Maybe you should, but you don't have to. Think about this as a thought experiment. So here's a story in the Christian tradition in particular, that there are these intelligences. They're more intelligent than human beings will ever become, and some of them are really good, and some of them are really bad. Now, again, ignore the literal meaning if you want to. What is the like sort of metaphorical meaning for this? That goodness and badness has no intrinsic connection to intelligence whatsoever, right? The greatest created intelligence in the world, according to the Christian tradition, is Lucifer, Satan, the most evil being in the world, right? So again, maybe you shouldn't believe in the literal existence of angels and demons, but the idea that there is this wisdom literature that completely detaches intellect from moral goodness and badness should, I think, give us some food for thought in thinking about exactly these kinds of questions when we think about how could smart people do so many abhorrent things.
Hello. First of all, I had a question about imposter syndrome. So for some brief context, I'm from a local high school in southern Minnesota that practices grade inflation, and I'm here now at a school that practices grade deflation. So, well then, I guess a lot of other freshmen, they also suffer from imposter syndrome. I know you mentioned that human nature undoubtedly practices comparison. So I guess my question is, what is a good mindset to have to really tackle like imposter syndrome?
So this one I can answer pretty well, I think. What you should be comparing yourself. So intelligence is inherently comparative. There's no ratio scale where I can say I have 46 units of intelligence. That's not a thing. It's all inherently comparative. And so what I would recommend is, while you're at school, is that you compare yourself to yourself. So say, like, how smart was I at the beginning of the semester? How smart am I now? And your goal, I don't want you to think I'm saying this should be your only goal, but your goal at school should be to be improving. And the only way you're an imposter is if you're not actually improving in some way. That doesn't have to be academically, that can be socially, that can be morally, that can be a lot of different things. But because you're at a school where you have the opportunity to improve intellectually, that may be a good one. And one of the things, when I was a graduate student and I got to Stanford for the first time, that's where I did my PhD, it was awful because everyone there knew tons more than I did. I mean, tons more than I did. I'm coming out of undergraduate, and then I'm amongst a bunch of people who have spent years doing nothing but studying the field of psychology. And they were talking about things I didn't understand and doing math I didn't understand, and it was really hard. And I went to a conference, and I didn't understand any of the talks that were going there. And 3 years later, I went back to that same conference. And I didn't feel like I had learned anything in the 3 years I was there. It's sort of like your hair is growing. You don't notice any given day that it's growing. But when I went back to that same conference 3 years later, I was able to ask an intelligent question at every talk I went to. And I only mention that because I could see the difference between my first year and my third year and how much I had grown intellectually. And guess what? I still hadn't caught any of the faculty. I still hadn't gotten anywhere near. There were still a lot of other people there who were much brighter, especially and much more accomplished in their fields because they had expertise that was in different areas than I did. But I knew I was growing. And if you're growing, you should feel good about yourself.
If I wanted to control all three of you separately in the fastest way possible, what should I do?
I don't understand the question.
You wanted to control us?
In the fastest way possible.
Do you mean like telepathy?
Not telepathy, but have intellectual control over your actions, your thoughts, etc.
Ooh, I would say like to induce like shame, like some kind of shame. That would be my intuition. Like you could, like I think in the present day context, you could ask something about race, and you would have all three of us answering within a very circumscribed kind of pathway.
Maybe. I mean, what I would say is that mind control is easy in science fiction and very difficult in reality. Governments have been trying to figure out how to control people for as long as there has been psychological science, and people continue to surprise governments by not being controlled. And so, look, if you wanted to get us to do specific things, like you want us to all breathe, you don't have to do anything. Like within a minute or two, we'll all do it. But if you want to control us to do things that are against our core values, there isn't an easy way. And it certainly isn't going to be the same for all three of us. And if there was a way to do it, I wouldn't tell you.
It seems neither intelligent nor wise to answer the question.
Let's see. Yes, right here, very close by.
My question is, at what point would we ever grant AI personhood, and like what factors like intelligence or ability would we be able to grant this AI personhood?
Justin.
Never.
So define a person.
An individual substance of a rational nature.
Did you say rational or irrational?
Rational. That's Boethius.
Ooh, if we're talking about rational agents, we don't get to define humans as personhood either, I would say. I would put humans in the rational category. We were just talking about this in my class this week. There was a big debate in my class, and the entire range was spanned. I would say if we could figure out how to give AI consciousness and sentience and emotion and intelligence, then that would be something we would have to start thinking very seriously about the ethical obligations we would have to AI. The problem is, I am not sure how we would ever know.
Right.
And that is a challenge. It's something that your generation is going to have to grapple with, because at some point, assuming the trajectory, we don't go into like a dark age in the next few years, the trajectory at which AI is advancing, it will be almost impossible to know. It will be possible to develop AI that are as convincing as any human. And then the question is it just being programmed to simulate, or is it real? And that is something that a lot of people are grappling with right now. But I am less inclined than Justin here to just categorically reject the possibility. I don't think we know yet what AI is going to be capable of. I will say that if you had asked me in 2022, or actually almost any computer scientist in 2022, they would have told you that what LLMs are doing right now would be impossible, especially given the cognitive architecture that they're using. And they are rewriting the models that we have to understand how computation works. So I think that has given me a lesson in humility, and I won't rule out the possibility that there will be a future AI that deserves moral standing. I don't think LLMs in their current instantiation do.
I think it should be said that my understanding of the philosophy of mind literature is that there is no widely agreed upon telltale sign that any of you have minds, right? Or intellects, that you are persons. You could be very, very sophisticated simulacra. And so the idea that we should treat each other as persons is like a properly basic belief, right? So once you accept that there's no way I can have first-person knowledge of your first-person experience, that I think you, number one, stop looking for a similar kind of thing with AIs. We can't find those things with people, let alone with machines. And then I think, number two, you begin to shift your question a little bit. I think the more pressing social question is not when do we give personhood to AI, but how that conversation is going to begin to inflect and modulate the personhood of humanity. Like the personhood of human persons. That's the thing that I'm most worried about.
And can I just add, I highly recommend, if you're interested in these issues, that you read Isaac Asimov's Bicentennial Man, which is exactly that question.
Show me an AI that can suffer for the love of another person. That would be a person, maybe. Okay, up here.
Sorry. Hi. You discussed meritocracy towards like the beginning of the forum, and I feel like the justification, or maybe the reason we strive for meritocracy, is because it pushes innovations that improve our quality of life. Do you believe that AI will hit a point where the usefulness of human productivity is very small, and where we'll have to reevaluate the idea of a meritocracy? And if that's the case, then what do you think we should pivot towards?
Okay, let's test the possibility here. So we strive for accomplishment in order to have a better human society.
Can I just close off the question and say, let's assume that it does get to that point.
Oh. Then I don't have an answer. I mean,
Okay, all right.
I'll punt it. I mean, it seems to me like that's not the case. Like the meritocracy is not about, in fact, improving the human condition. You get rich doing all kinds of exploitative things in this world, right? And I think that it seems to me that the reason for a lot of striving is financial gain, detached almost altogether from moral considerations.
So one of the problems I have is delineating when you say AI is better than humans at things, but the potential for that to happen. where that limit is. So if we say, hey, let's say AI is really, really good at math. Okay, maybe that's something that humans can do for fun, because it can be fun to think about these things, but not productively. In your world, is AI better at raising children? Is AI better at providing companionship? Is AI better at these sorts of things? Now, I actually am not saying that as a rhetorical device. I'm actually not sure where you stand, because I can imagine a world in which AI is actually better at providing companionship than a human is. That it understands psychology to a level that is so much more sophisticated that humans, you may have noticed in your lives, we don't always do a great job of this. People break up, they get divorced, they lose friendships. Not all humans are great at maintaining relationships, and you could imagine an AI that is much better. And in a world where AI does that, it's a very different world to me, and I would say very different. I give a different answer about what the role of humans is than in a world where AI is better at certain intellectual achievements. And so I think it's one of those questions that requires lots of dissection to be able to answer correctly. But I will say that at every stage of innovation in the past few hundred years, everyone has said, well, that's the end of humans. Like, we get automation, well, why do we need humans anymore? And at every stage, humans have adapted to find new niches that they can fill that whatever the new technology is could not. And that is the being able to adapt to fill a new niche is the definition of intelligence, and humans are, in addition to being stupid, very smart. And so I would say I don't know what it will look like, but I would be very surprised if in the future humans haven't adapted to whatever the niches there are for humans to fill.
Sure. Okay, it was a great talk, and thanks for letting me ask the question. So I have a question for Justin. I don't know if you're familiar with the novel A Flower for Algernon. So it's just about like a retarded person being given like intelligence and being taken away. So I was really interested in the feeling that when like this main character went from being like intellectually challenged to being intelligent, it feels like if there's a person that suddenly appeared in him. And then when they took the intelligence away from him, it seems like as if there's like a person that disappeared. Like we can't access that person anymore. We cannot talk to that person anymore. So I know you've probably worked with more like Down syndrome like patients. I just wonder, why do you think that the feeling of a person being there, why does that have to do with intelligence? Yeah. And also like if intelligence is the thing that actually makes maybe a person worthy of, like love or even life. I know it's like a super poignant question to ask, but I would love to hear yours.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So I'd recommend to you a book by a philosopher named Eva Kitay, Learning from My Daughter. Her daughter Sesha, S-E-S-H-A, is profoundly impaired, and in this book, for pages and pages and pages, the author talks about what Sesha is like, what her preferences are, what her dispreferences are, what she learns, all the rest of these things. There's no sense in this book that a person is absent there. And so my suspicion is just that the feeling that a person appears and disappears is a function more of a reader's lack of real familiarity with the person. People who work with profoundly cognitively impaired people are often able to read features of their personhood that bystanders, onlookers can't read. It seems to me that we should defer to the judgment of those caretakers when attributing personhood to those people. On the account of like intellect being sort of the ground of your standing, in addition to being deeply undemocratic, I just don't think that's going to be the recipe for our individual and collective flourishing. I don't know of societies in which they have thought that the very best people are that for which the rest of society should be aimed and instrumentalized. It seems to me that justice is something like common good. the sense that we're all in this together, we all have different gifts and talents, we receive them from some mysterious source which is not ourselves, and that all these talents, gifts, and resources are in fact opportunities for us to give these gifts to others. And so to the degree we find ourselves intelligent and smart, we should think of ourselves as future gift givers. Thank you.